Good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming to our town hall. Happy New Year. We're very happy to have you here, and we will get started. Please note we are recording this presentation, this town hall, and so we ask if you have a question that involves any personally identifiable information that you either generalize it or that you ask it directly to one of us after the meeting in an email. We don't want to inadvertently share anyone's PII. Um, we will be taking questions. We ask that you put them in the chat, not the Q&A. We're going to monitor the chat. After we have imparted what we'd like to share with you, we will be reviewing the questions and reading them out loud and answering them during the presentation. I'd like to take this time to introduce my colleagues so you know who's here, and then I'll have some reminders to get started. So I'm Julie Gammon. I work with H's and J's. We have Elsa Gontram, who is the Associate Director for the Bechtel International Center. We have Ioana Gerwal-Federici, who is our J expert. We have Katie Kremen, who works with H's and J's. Priscilla Woon, who is an H expert. And Valentina Canovo, who is an H expert and also is the UIT liaison. So if you're in the UIT department, you'll know Valentina. We're going to have sort of a round robin style of imparting information, but before we start, I wanted to give some general information to get us going. So to start, I wanted to remind everyone and ask for your cooperation in allowing us a 60-day processing period. We know there's been a lot of urgency lately and things have come sidewise at you, but it really helps us if you can hold to a 60-day processing period to allow us. And the 60 days starts after we have received the completed workflow and the package of documents. And that enables us to help everyone equally. And we really want to be able to help everyone meet their needs. So we thank you for helping with us with that. Next, I want to move on and highlight some recent happenings. On January 20th, the White House issued an executive order mandating extreme vetting of people applying for admission to the United States. That's at the borders or the ports or at the US consulates. So because of that, we ask that you please review your risk tolerance for international travel, especially as the spring travel season comes up. We have posted this executive order on our immigration updates at the Bechtel International Center if you want to review it yourself. It has a 60-day period in it in which the White House will be gathering data. That ends about March 20th. And then we'll see what is the next order that arises out of that. Related to that, we wanted to give you a bird's eye view of what's happening at the consulates, especially with regard to Iranians and Chinese. What we're seeing kind of as an overall picture. We have seen an increase in denials of Iranians at the visa for their visa applications. And we've seen some processing delays for Chinese nationals. We ask that you please encourage the people you're working with, your employees, that we cannot ask the senator's office to inquire on visa processing until it's been in administrative processing for at least 3 months. The senator is happy to reach out and inquire, but wants to allow the State Department to do their job. And I know that's very tough and it causes a lot of emotional distress, but we ask for your cooperation with this. My team has asked me to give you an example so you have some real world backstory. So what happens at the consulate is a congressional inquiry is given the highest priority inquiry. So a case could be within normal processing. It could be sitting on the desk of a case officer, a consular officer, ready for approval. And if that morning they receive a consular inquiry, it immediately comes off that officer's desk. It goes to the congressional liaison office's desk, who reviews it and then sends a response, and then it goes back to the case officer. So that's why we really encourage you and your employees to allow normal processing for the administrative processing. And we are happy to go to the senator's office when it's been 3 months processing for the senator to inquire on it. But we really want to make sure that things happen timely, and we don't want to see any extra delays for your employees. Related to that, we are asking or suggesting that timelines and expectations be revised in your office, because we anticipate that there may be some give or take in timelines over the next 4 years and in processing. And we will certainly, if we have any information that is actually very exact in that, we will certainly share it and post it. But we ask you to be flexible, as we are all working with different timelines and different timeline expectations for visa processing. Ours still remains 60 days for visa processing within our office, but externally towards the government for the various issues. Please, be as flexible as you can with us. But on that note, we've had a lot of churn and questions about 2019s. And for some reason, there's been a perception that our office isn't processing 2019s for J1s anymore. We are still processing. We will not stop processing. That is totally within our office. So we're not sure where that is coming from, but we are processing 2019s and we will continue with them. So now I'd like to turn this over to Joanna, who will speak to some J issues.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome. I just wanted to mention that it seems that chat is disabled, so you'll have to put your questions in the Q&A, and that's fine. We can answer them there. So I wanted to talk first about a new development that has taken place on December 9th of last year. And that is that the State Department published a revised J Exchange Visitor Skills List. So the J Skills List essentially lists or names countries that have a list of skills which can trigger the 2-year home residency requirement for J scholars. And this particular revised list has the State Department removed 37 countries from this skills list and did not add any additional countries to the list. So the list has been made much, much smaller. This means that if a J scholar was made subject to the 2-year home residency requirement based on the skills list, that means that their particular skill as listed on the DS 2019 was listed on their country's skills list, they are no longer subject to the 212E. The 212E is another name for the 2-year home residency requirement. So it just means that either now or retroactively, so in the past, if they were made subject based on the skills list, not on government funding, then they are no longer subject and they no longer have to apply for a waiver of the 212E, which means that if they're applying for an H-1B or a green card, they no longer need a waiver. So this is especially relevant to the Chinese nationals due to the fact that prior to this revised skills list, every single skill was on the skills list for China. So a Chinese national would automatically be subject to the 2-year home residency requirement, and that's no longer the case. So that's really big news. India is also off of this skills list. So this is quite big news for many of our scholars. The second issue that we wanted to touch on today is government funding. We've had many questions at this point about government funding, because that is the second way that a scholar, J scholar, can be made subject to the 2-year home residency requirement if they have government funding for their program at Stanford. So the way that the government funding works for the 212E or the 2-year home residency requirement is that the government funding has to be from a government entity that is their home government entity. So usually it's by permanent residency, or actually both by permanent residency or citizenship. So if they have funding from, let's say, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and they're Japanese, and this is from the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, then they would be made subject to the 212E. Also, consul officers frequently make scholars subject to the 212E based on government funding if, for example, they have funding from a university, which is a public university, and that is the case with many universities outside of the United States. So they may most likely will be made subject based on that. If, however, a J scholar has indirect government funding from a US source, then they would not be made subject if they're being paid by Stanford. So that is always the case with Stanford scholars, because if they were funded directly by the government, like let's say they had Fulbright funding, then they would not be sponsored by Stanford. They would be sponsored for their visa by Fulbright. But we do have many, many postdocs, for example, who have indirect funding from NIH, but that funding goes to their professor, to their PI, not to them directly. And on the DS 2019, it would say that they are funded by Stanford. So they would not be made subject to 212E based on that indirect funding. So if you have any particular questions about your scholars, you can always reach out to us either here or at international scholars at stanford.edu. And now I will pass it on to Julie again.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Joanna. I am following up on that to talk about fellowships for H-1Bs. We have seen some confusion lately whether a person on an H-1B can receive fellowship funding, because often the case is they're in J-1 where they do have fellowship funding, and then they go to H-1B. A person on an H-1B cannot have fellowship funding, and this is clearly outlined on our website. It's on the postdoc website as well. So we just want to remind you, and if you have any fellows in H-1B status, that is something that needs to be revisited. But I believe that it has been cleared up since then, but we wanted to make sure that that was very clear. An H-1B is an employee and must receive a salary. An H-1B cannot have third-party remuneration. With that, I'm going to pass it to Katie.
Thanks, Julie. Good morning, everyone. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, well, mostly to have you remind your foreign national employees to ensure the accuracy of their U.S. immigration records, in particular their I-94 entry document. So following every international trip, they should check their I-94 record for accuracy. They can find this document online at the CBP website. They can just Google I-94 and that'll come up. And this record serves as proof of their lawful admission to the U.S. And there's two things that they should really pay attention to. I mean, they should review everything to make sure it's accurate, but the two things that they should really pay attention to is the class of admission. So make sure that it's the right status. If it's H-1B, J-1, E-3, make sure that that's correct. And then also the admit until date. It'll be the expiration date, and it should align with their current I-797 approval notice. So any discrepancies in this record could impact their immigration status and their work authorization. if the employee's passport expires before the end date on their approval notice, it's very likely that CBP will use the passport expiration date as their admit until date. And so that means that that it'll be shortened. That will be their status, and then their work authorization will end on that date. So in that case, we would need to file their H-1B extension or whatever their status is, their TN, E3, their extension. We'd have to file it before the end date on their I-94 entry document and not on the I-797 approval notice. So if your employee notices that they received a shortened I-94, please provide them, or please have them provide a copy to our office so we can update our system and plan for the extension accordingly. Occasionally, CBP does make a mistake on the I-94 entry document, either the wrong class of admission or the wrong admit until date that's not based on the passport expiration. And if that's the case, then the employee can email CBP to have this corrected, and we can provide that information, or we can provide that instructions if they send us an email. So yeah, just remind your foreign national employees to always check their I-94 record immediately after re-entering the US. Because as I mentioned earlier, any discrepancies in their I-94 record could impact their immigration status and their work authorization. So with that, I'm passing it to Priscilla.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to touch upon H-1B worksite locations where the H-1B employee will work. Generally, the H-1B visa is work location specific. What that means is that all worksite locations need to be included on the H-1B petition that is filed with USCIS. Later, if there's a material change to the worksite location that was not originally specified in the initial H-1B, then an amendment would need to be filed and approved by USCIS before the change can go into effect. So for example, if an employee was working on campus and then moves from California to Washington and will work from Washington, then an amendment would need to be filed and approved before this work location can go into effect. On the other hand, if there's a minor change to the worksite location, then no H-1B amendment would be needed. For instance, if the employee was approved to work on campus, and then the department later decides the employee will perform some work from home, but still within Santa Clara County, then no H-1B amendment would be needed. However, in order to add the second home work location, the employee will need to physically post their certified labor condition application in 2 different locations in their home for 10 days. After they post it, they will need to fill out a posting confirmation form and email it back to Bechtel. So to recap, if there are any changes to the H-1B employee's worksite location, this will need to be documented, whether through an H-1B amendment or LCA posting. We can help you determine which one, so please contact us at internationalscholars@stanford.edu. And again, please let us know well in advance of the change going into effect so we can ensure that the change is timely, documented, and approved by USCIS. With that, I will pass it over to Valentina.
Hey everyone, Valentina here. As Priscilla mentioned, worksite locations are important for various reasons. Part of that is also on-site visits. This is something that has always been a part of the H-1B process, but I will say it's been a very, very long time since Stanford has experienced this with our H-1B holders. But there are some, murmurs going around about worksite visits, and we just wanted to touch on this and let you all know that we are communicating with OGC, so Stanford's Office of General Counsel, to kind of discuss protocol, but just a little window into what worksite locations are. Again, the H-1B petitions are connected with an employee and their job and their worksite locations, and then someone from Homeland Security, or it could be ICE, or it could be FDNS, which is the Fraud Detection and National Security Group, could go ahead and follow through with on-site visits. But again, this is something that Stanford rarely deals with, but we are working internally to kind of come up with a plan of who to contact if this were to happen with any of our employees. So we will be in touch.
Thank you, Valentina. All right, we have answered some of the questions in the chat. We can go ahead and start. I'm going to read this one, and Valentina, I'm going to give this one to you. If we wanted to give a postdoc on an H-1B a salary increase and a bonus, do we need to amend the H-1B?
Ooh, well, good for the postdoc. The amendment should come if the increase or the bonus is with any increased job responsibilities. So if the integrity of their position changes, or if what they're handling at work changes, then we could do an amendment. But if it's just a salary increase, I don't think, and no work site changes, then the H-1B is fine as is.
All right, thank you, Valentina. I think the next question is for Priscilla. Would you need to do the 10-day posting for a different location, such as a person moves from Stanford main campus to Stanford Research Park?
You're muted, Priscilla.
I'm not sure where Stanford Research Park is, but if that's in Santa Clara County, then the person would just, or the department would need to post the certified LCA at 2 locations within Stanford Research Park.
Thank you, Priscilla. The next question is about the travel update for spring, the email that we sent yesterday. That was sent to the departments, and we ask that you please share that with your international scholars.
I just wanted to add, I will be sending it to the international scholars.
To the J's.
Correct. Yes.
Right. So
probably sometime later today.
Right. And the people on H-1B or E or O who are in your various departments, we ask that you please share that with them directly. Okay. Okay, here is another one. Priscilla, I'm going to give this one back to you, if you don't mind. If a researcher works from their home in California a few days of the week, should the home be listed as a work location in their H-1B application?
Yes, it should be listed on their H-1B. We need to include if they'll be working on campus as well as at their home, like a hybrid schedule, then yes, we do need to include that on the labor certification application, which is included in the H-1B. So yes.
So the next question is a J question. We are looking to appoint a postdoc J visa of Russian citizenship, but currently in Oxford. Do you know what the timeline for that is? So I'm assuming, Shital, that you're asking for the timeline of the visa processing, because obviously the DS 2019 is just a regular timeline, usually for 8 weeks ahead of time for a postdoc. So it's very difficult to answer that question. It depends on many factors, not just the fact that they are of Russian nationality that may delay things. It has delayed things in the past, but not for every single Russian national. So very difficult to answer. They could be put in administrative processing for months, or they could get it in a matter of a couple of months or a month. It's a case by case basis.
All right. Katie, I'm going to give you this one. Are you aware of any implications to H-1B processing, including timelines? I plan to have my H-1B start from July 1st. Any suggestions regarding when to send the application to Bechtel?
You can send the application now. We did say 60-day minimum, but that's our minimum. We can submit your H-1B petition 6 months in advance of the start date, and we can start working on it 7 months in advance just to get everything together. So the earlier the better for us. Um, we're not sure if the USCIS timelines are what their timing is going to be in the coming months and years. But it's always better to provide us with your information as soon as possible. So up to 6 months in advance of your start date.
Thank you, Katie.
Sure.
I'll take the next one. Will a disability leave affect the status of an H-1B visa petition while it's in progress? Actually, I'm going to ask that you send the details of that specifically to us if that is something that you're dealing with. In general, leaves are allowed. H-1B workers are allowed to have leaves just as their U.S. Counterparts, the U.S. citizen counterparts are. So we would want to look at that individually. It might not have an effect, but we might want to adjust the timeline. So please reach out directly on that. The next one, let's see. How about I'll throw it back to you, Priscilla. A postdoc on an H-1B will transition to an instructor. Does a new H-1B needed even though the visa is still valid and the title still reflects researcher?
Yes, a new H-1B amendment will be needed because they're changing positions from a postdoc to a instructor, and that is considered a material change. So amendment would be needed.
Thank you very much. Katie, how about you for this next one? An ASR candidate is currently a postdoc in the 4th year on an H-1B visa with another U.S. university. Current appointment expires before visa. How might that impact the process for coming to Stanford?
Maybe I'm not understanding, but it sounds like this is just a change of employer. And that wouldn't have his appointment ending before his visa expiring wouldn't have any effect on the transfer, H-1B transfer to Stanford. It would be a typical change of employer, if I'm understanding the question correctly. I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in.
I agree with you, Katie.
Okay.
The next is regarding, again, a Russian J1 who's been in administrative processing since the beginning of November. Is there a timeline as to when they will be given or denied their visa? Unfortunately, no. It is processing time. If you remember your elementary school teachers, when you'd ask how long does a essay need to be, and they'd say as long as a piece of string, because it's however long it needs to be. That is the processing time at the consulates, unfortunately. Sorry to share that. The next question is, are unpaid leaves allowed while on H-1B? If yes, but please reach out to us for how that should be structured. But in general, if a person requests a leave and it's documented and the department approves it, it can be given to the H-1B worker. It needs to be documented for a very discrete amount of time, when it's going to start, when it's going to end. So reach out to us for further details. Next, Joanna, I think you can take this next one. Oh, well. Next question is, if someone was subject to the J1 2-year home residency requirement, but is from a country that is no longer subject to the announcement, should we include the announcement, what should we include in the H-1B to explain this? Katie, do you want to take that one actually instead of Joanna?
Sure. There's nothing that you need to provide because we will note that they are no longer subject to the skills list. And when you answer, there's some questions on the workflow asking if the person is subject to 212E, and you can answer no to that. Even though it says yes on their DS 2019, they're no longer subject. So you can answer that question no. And there's no further documentation that you need to provide to us.
Great, thank you. Joanna, how about you? If someone on a J1 has a waiver of the 212E, is that the same or different than an advisory opinion?
Yes, so that is different. So a waiver is binding, and one would need a waiver if they were subject to the 212E based on government funding. They would need a waiver to include with their H-1B petition or to apply for a green card. An advisory opinion is essentially an opinion that is issued by the State Department, and they take a look at the person's information and decide whether they think that person is in fact subject or not. That opinion is not binding, which means that USCIS, which is the final determinant for petitions, would either accept that decision or not. So those are two different processes.
Great, thank you. The next question, may I give to you, Elsa? It is, if a postdoc is transferring to Stanford and they are on an H-1B visa and asking to transfer their fellowship, will they be allowed?
No, they will not. External fellowships are not accepted for H-1Bs.
Thank you. All right. Back to you, Joanna. Do you want to read it and
Sure.
take it forward?
Sure, I can read it. Does the DS 2019 specify if they're subject to the 212E based on the skills list? I want to understand how we determine why they are subject if they are no longer based on the update. That's a very, very good question. So some of the time, the consular officers will state on the DS 2019, there's a section, if you're looking at the DS 2019, it's at the bottom left corner. Sometimes the consular officers doing the visa processing will state, will check off on what basis they are subject or if they are not subject. So there's different checks that they can make on the DS 2019. However, many times the DS 2019 is left blank and consular officers do not check that. So then you can look at the visa, the actual visa sticker in their passport. And at the bottom of that, it should state whether they are subject. Sometimes I have seen it stated that they're subject, but it doesn't say why they are subject. So then you can look at the DS 2019, see where their funding is coming from. If you see there is no government funding, then they're not based on government funding. If they only have funding from Stanford, let's say, or if they're coming with personal funding, then you can tell. Now, some cases are a bit more complicated because they may be subject based on government funding, but they have funding from a university, as I said before, which is not quite as clear as if there's a government institution on there. So there are cases where it's a bit murky, and that's why you have to talk to the scholar and determine their particular case. But those are the two documents, really the only places where you can see if there something is indicated, whether they are subject or not. And sometimes they differ because sometimes consular officer makes a mistake. So that happens as well, but sometimes it's a bit of a more complicated process, and you have to do a little bit of detective work to figure that out. But you can always email us and we can try and help you.
Okay, I'm going to go out of line, but Joanna, do you recommend they get an advisory opinion to understand if they're subject?
Yes, we do recommend that you get an advisory opinion only if there is a situation where it's unclear. So if someone is, let's say someone is made subject and says to you, I do not have government funding and I'm not on the skills list, but I am made subject. It says that I'm subject based on either one of those. then an advisory opinion would be very helpful because most likely that advisory opinion would be honored by USCIS if there's no reason for that person to be subject. So that's where the advisory opinion can come in helpful. But if there's no government funding, there's no skills list, and the person it doesn't say on any of their documentation that they're subject, then there's no point for the advisory opinion.
Thank you. Valentina, how about the next one? I have an applicant outside the state of California who is asking if an H-1B visa is possible for them to work remotely.
Sure. And I'll also let Elsa interject, but it's very, very rare that we ever see H-1Bs that are fully remote. I think Stanford policy on fully remote work is that it has to be approved basically up the ladder to the dean, VP, all of that. So, Elsa, do you have any insight as to H-1B holders being fully remote?
No, I think it's obviously that we've had more remote workers since the pandemic, but still special permissions are required. Yeah.
Thank you both. It looks like the next one, Joanna or Katie, would you like to take the next one? It's for my incoming postdocs, would it be okay for them to contact Bechtel through the Bechtel Scholar email, or rather have the postdoc admins reach out to be the liaison? The person says often I don't know how to ask their questions. So what do you prefer?
We would like to start with the admins to be the liaison. If there is a complex or a complicated issue, then we're happy to speak with the employee. But it is best just because we get so many emails. It's best to work with the admins directly. But like I said, we're happy to also speak with the employees if there's something a little like out, unusual. But if it's straightforward, then the admin.
And if I may, I just wanted to add one thing to that, Katie. I just want to say that sometimes, we get emails directly from scholars, and we don't necessarily like to answer those, especially if the scholar is not here at Stanford yet, but is asking hypothetical questions, because we want to make sure that the department knows about this person. This person is actually coming to Stanford. We don't want to make any assumptions that the scholar has an appointment, that they're being hired. So that's why we always try to liaise with the department as much as possible. Of course, if a scholar is here and, as Katie said, they have a question that the department cannot answer, then we're happy to speak with them. And we have office hours for walk-ins for the scholar. So there are many ways that they can get in touch with us.
And I'd like to add on to that. The same goes with the H-1B, potential H-1B visa holders, because people reach out to us directly, and we don't necessarily even know if the departments are going to sponsor them for an H-1B. So it's really important that the admin reaches out to us, or that the questions are channeled through the admin, so that we know that there actually will be a sponsorship. Sometimes people want, they're very eager and they want to get information, but the department may not be ready to sponsor them for an H-1B. So we appreciate that too. We're happy to talk to the H-1B, but we'd like the admin to, primarily drive that conversation so that we know it's authorized. Okay. This is a little bit of a long question. I think I'm going to throw it to you, Priscilla, but it is. If an employee on an H-1B needs to travel to their home country the same year that their H-1B expires, how far in advance should they return to the U.S., as I believe they shouldn't be traveling while their H-1B extension petition is in progress, correct or not? Should they either return to the U.S. before the H-1B petition is submitted, or stay abroad while their H-1B petition is being processed? Would you advise that they return at least 60 days before the effective date of the H-1B visa extension, since Bechtel will be working on the visa extension? And Priscilla, let me know if you need me to parse that out. It was quite long with a lot of parts.
Wow. Okay. So it's kind of hard to work with these hypotheticals, but um, the let's see. So we can file the H-1B two ways. We can file it via consular processing while they are abroad, or we can file it while they are within the United States. So, but if they are in the United States, then you're correct. The person should be present in the United States when the petition is being adjudicated at USCIS. Okay. If you're requesting consular processing, they don't have to be inside the US. But if you if we submit the petition and it gets approved, then the person would then need to apply for their H-1B visa stamp and make an appointment at the embassy to get their stamp in their passport. So that process maybe it's involved, and a lot of the times the consulate do not have appointments readily available. So that needs to be taken into consideration when they're going to travel, when they can get their visa stamp at the U.S. Embassy abroad. And then another thing to note is that if their appointment starts, say, December 1st, and they're abroad, and the employee can only enter the U.S. 10 days prior to their proposed start date. So I hope I answered your question.
Thanks, Priscilla. The next question is a J. And Katie or Joanna, you want to take this one? Is renewing a J visa solely dependent on filing the J extension form in Access? Are there any additional steps that need to be completed?
So, yes, so you first need to make sure that the appointment is renewed, and that, of course, depends on the classification of the person. So, if the person's a VSR, you need to make sure that you renew the VSR appointment. If the person's a postdoc, it has to go through the postdoc office, and they will approve the extension, DS 2019 extension, at the same time as they approve the appointment extension. So that's the step from Stanford. And then I just want to remind everyone that when the DS 2019 is extended, the person can stay in the United States for as long as the DS 2019 is valid, even if the visa in their passport has expired. That's really, really important for them to know. Many scholars go into panic mode and they think they have to leave right away in order to, excuse me, in order to get a new visa. And that's not the case. They will have to get a new visa the next time they leave the United States. In order to re-enter the US, they have to have a new visa. But if they're just staying here, then there's no need to do that.
Can I add one more thing, Yana? Since we don't get communications from the waiver division, we'd also appreciate if you checked with the postdoc themselves or the J visa holder themselves to make sure they didn't obtain a waiver to their home residency requirement if they had one.
Yeah, and that's actually listed on the, when you submit the DS 2019 extension request, there's a checkpoint, you have to check that. So if they've received notification from the State Department that their waiver has been recommended by the State Department, at that point we can no longer extend the DS 2019. So you'll have to ask your scholar. Thanks for bringing that up, Elsa.
And I want to segue off of that. I think Joanna made a great point about the visa validity. Just to add to that, the H-1B visa stamp in their passport also is only necessary for international travel. So they do not have to get a new visa stamp if they get an H-1B, or they're extending their H-1B if they're here in the United States. Once we extend them and they have the approval notice with the I-94 at the bottom, as Katie said, the I-94 controls status. If we have that, then they are lawfully in the United States, lawfully employed, and they don't have to travel outside the US to get a visa stamp unless they have other travel and they need to come back in. The next question is about Valentina. I'm going to pass this one to you.
Sure.
Can the department get a prevailing wage information from Bechtel without an open case?
So I know a few months ago we had a similar town hall saying that because for certain job codes that we often see with our H-1B petitions, there had been a pretty drastic increase of prevailing wages for them, that in order to prevent, any wage issues once petitions got to our desks, we would offer our services and kind of preemptively take a look at those. We tried that. It was a little overwhelming for our caseload, and also just with how fast-paced and how quickly everything is moving in the immigration world right now. I'm going to say if the case is not open, we will not give you a window into what the prevailing wage is or should be. But just keep in mind that Stanford is very competitive with the wages that they offer. So it's even with the increases that happened over summer, it's still relatively few and far between that we see wage issues. So I would go ahead and proceed with the H-1B request, proceed with sending us the documents and submitting the workflow and access. And if there should be a prevailing wage issue, then we will work with you, and we kind of iron out those details very early on in the process.
Thank you, Valentina. Priscilla, do you want to see if you can take this
Okay.
question?
If the H-1B employee decides to return to the U.S. before their H-1B visa extension petition is submitted, how in advance should they return to the U.S.? Would they need to return 60 days before visa effective date, taking into consideration, or 2 weeks before, or 2 weeks since it takes? Oh, goodness. Okay, so no, they do not need to return 60 days before the visa date takes into effect. The 60-day processing window is Bechtel's processing time. So they could be outside the US, but they would need to provide us with their latest I-94 record once they returned.
Priscilla, would you agree that in this situation, perhaps if an admin runs into something like this, to reach out to somebody on our team as early as possible to actually work through a timeline that applies in this specific person's case?
Definitely. It'd be helpful to actually work with hard dates. Yes.
I want to interject really quickly. I saw a hand go up. I don't know if that was an accident or if we have a question that's maybe easier spoken than written. So just want to give space for whomever's hand was just up a few minutes ago. Or if it was an accident, I'll mute myself again. So.
Well, we have about 10 minutes remaining, but I don't see any open questions. If you have any last burning questions, feel free to pop them in. If not, we will return 10 minutes of your day to you. And here's a question. Ioana, you want to take this one? It's an F1 OPT transferring to a J1.
Sure. So if an F1 OPT holder needs to transfer to a J1 after receiving their DS 2019, can they still apply for the J1 stamp in the USA and get the stamp without returning to their home country? So by stamp, I am assuming, Nancy, that you mean visa, which is not possible. You cannot get a visa in the United States. However, what they can do is they can change status in the United States. So once they obtain the DS 2019, they can apply for a change of status, and that's through USCIS. That process right now, so we would not recommend that previously because it took about a year and a half for this type of change of status. But last year, USCIS introduced premium processing, which means they would have to apply for a change of status with premium processing. Which I just want to make sure that they understand it costs $1,900 just to do the premium processing. And then I think about $400 to do the actual change of status. So they would, and that takes 30 days. However, we have seen several cases now where USCIS approves the change of status just right away. So somebody could say, okay, I would like to apply for a change of status effective September 1st. And we have seen cases where USCIS approves it effective 3 days after they have received the application. So it could be in March and they wanted a change of status in September. So I just wanted to say that that does happen. So for your scholars to be aware of that. But that is one possibility. They still would not obtain a visa with that change of status. They would just be immediately or after, when the date is effective of the change of status, they would then change into J status. However, the next time they leave the United States, they would have to obtain a visa at a US embassy or consulate in order to return to the US with J status. Another way to do this, if they wanted to avoid the change of status completely in the United States, they could just leave, take the DS 2019 and apply for a J at a US consulate or embassy. So there are two different ways that this can be done. Oh, and there's another J1. Need to work on a J1, haven't done in 5 years. What training recommend? So we do have monthly training, and Katie, I'll let you speak to that because I forgot the next one. The next one is.
I'm doing a training next Wednesday at 10 a.m. I'll put you can register for it. I'm going to put the link in the text here. And that also has if you can attend the training, there's like a workflow Word document that you can review. And there's also information for H-1B workflow training on there as well. But we have them about once a month. And I think the first Wednesday of every month, 10 a.m.
Thank you. The next question, does Bechtel do regular and premium processing for H-1B? Yes, the department can decide how they want to proceed. We recommend premium processing. It's the only way to control a timeline at the Immigration Service, but it is up to the department to decide. If you're going to do regular processing, please know it could take 3 to 4 to 5 months at the USCIS. So we ask that you submit it to our office 6, 7 months earlier than the start date. We've even had people who've submitted at 8, so we can calendar when to start it. We can't actually file the LCA more than 6 months before the start date, but if we have it early, we can calendar it to try and file it early to allow for the lengthy processing at the Immigration Service if the department refuses to pay for premium processing. All right, I'm going to ask anyone in our panelists have anything additional they want to, yes, of course you can drop off early with premium. We love early. We love having extra time. Makes everyone happy and makes everyone comfortable. So yes, please drop off early with premium. Anyone on the panel want to say anything, add any last comments before we wrap up?
Yeah, I just want to say, Julie, I think we received a question about when this town hall would be posted on our website, and you responded tomorrow morning. Hopefully we'll get it on tomorrow morning. We have to create some space on our website because I think we'll be having quite a few town halls just to keep people updated on what's going on in the immigration world. As Valentina mentioned, things are happening fast and furiously, and we want to keep you all apprised of these developments. So give us till Friday if that's okay. Because I think we need to carve out a little space somewhere that's easily accessible to everybody. Thanks, Julie.
Yeah, thank you, Elsa. Thank you for holding my reins in a little bit. I wanted to get that out there, but you're right. There is the logistics of getting a space for it. So thank you for adding that. Anyone else? All right, well, we're going to go ahead and turn off the recording and wish you all a lovely day. Thank you for coming. We are going to try and hold these town halls every month, so please look for the next one. And we'll also be having open houses so that you can ask questions of us. The open house is just literally, we are there to answer your questions. And the town hall is where we have discrete information to impart. So thank you again. Have a great day.